Hey, John, we're slowly marching towards spring training here and looking at what the Mariners have done in the offseason, and it's amazing. You listed, I don't know, no less than 15 different possibilities for players they could go after. And one by one, they fell off the board and went to other teams. The one you didn't mention was Jorge Polanco, and that's who they ended up with. How surprised were you when you heard the news that the Mariners re-signed Jorge Polanco coming off the season that he had here?
I did not think he would go back to Seattle. And yet, in fairness, and I know this has been part of the narrative that Jerry DiPoto spoke about, and I'm sure we'll get more to that press conference later on in the conversation, but the basic idea was that he went through a lot of injuries this past year, and that by the end he was closer to the version of Polanco who they believe he can be in 2025. Now, he is not exactly a rookie any longer from a standpoint of his body and his durability, and given that he had injuries in 2024, might it be reasonable to assume it could happen again? Certainly that's part of the concern and part of the risk of bringing in a player who's already had some injury issues. However, it is a one-year deal, and there are those who believe that there is no such thing as a bad one-year contract. So it's a very manageable one-year contract that fits within the Mariners' budget, which notably is not as big as the budget was a couple years ago, which I think is a key part of why we are where we are right now when talking about this team. But can he help them? Will he play some third base potentially, just given the dynamics of the infield? That's obviously a possibility. So there's a lot of
that's the assignment. They said he's going to play third base,
and I describe it that way because I'm just not sure how that looks in the end, because he's been a middle infielder for basically his entire career, and so now he's going over to third base. He can probably handle it, but this is a pitching and defense team that needs third base to be played at an above-average level, I believe. Yes, they missed plenty of bats, but that's a really crucial defensive position to have someone at a relatively advanced baseball age, at least a mid-career player, move there and do it for the first time in the major league. So, I heard that too and raised an eyebrow a bit at that. This is a plan that involves a fair amount of hope. And that is true. Maybe that becomes the new Morosi drop leading into the segment, because this plan involves a fair amount of hope. May well describe a lot of what the Mariners are doing in 2025. Yeah, Solano, who's an older player, maybe he finds it for one more year and Polanco bounces back. There's a lot of hope and some projection, but you're also expecting that Garver bounces back. You're expecting that Haniger bounces back. There's a lot of hope as part of this plan for the Mariners in 2025.
What about for Polanco as far as his at the plate? How much do you think this can help? How much have you seen, JP, players that you didn't know they needed surgery, or they were just kind of banged up, and then they get the surgery because everything is so exact at the plate. You know, the swing, everything. I always say, if you're a football player, you can play through things because you can do things different ways and whatnot. But if it's something that screws up your swing or something like that that's so delicate, have you seen that happen? I mean, is there some hope for him possibly being better at the plate because of the surgery that he had?
Well, there is, and I think that there's a reason why there were some pretty significant teams that were on Polanco. The Astros liked him. The Yankees, I was told, liked him as well. So there have been a couple serious suitors who would have put him in varying roles, I think, at that point in time. Maybe the Astros would have also had him playing at third base or in a different spot, given where their infield sits now with Paredes coming in and, of course, Walker, and now Bregman, at least for the moment, not being on their roster. So I have seen it before. I've also seen the close cousin, Dave, of the surgery changing the player is the swing change, transforming his offensive potential. And that has occurred. It was interesting to hear Alex Anthopoulos describing Jurickson Profar and why they believe in him, and a big part of that was describing the swing change that he went through. And Alex started talking about Jose Bautista and Encarnacion and others. So do I believe that Polanco can be a better player in 25 than he was in 24? I do. I actually think that he will be a better player this year than he was last year. The question is the totality of the offense good enough for that all to carry the day and to put this team in the playoffs? I think that is the major unknown. And it's also important to remember, a year ago, same player we're talking about, Polanco, the idea was he was going to come in and bat third.
Mm-hmm.
He was going to be that important of a player for this team. So he's someone they've clearly liked in the past, and they get him at a bit of a discount because of the poor season he had. They believe in the medical underpinnings here that he's going to be a better and more durable player. It's actually not a bad risk at this point in time when you consider what the price point is, what the assignment is from the offensive profile. I do worry a bit about the defense, but I think he'll hit more than he did in 2024. The question becomes, for a team that was so offensively inconsistent and struck out so much, is it basically enough to say that the last month of the season, and in fairness, I know Jerry DiPoto's been criticized roundly in the last couple days. In fairness, they scored the most runs in the American League after September 1st this past year. And we've always heard the stories about not basing too much of your analysis on September baseball, but they scored the most runs in the American League for a month at the end. When a Rosarena was there, when more of the team was healthy and productive. So they're basically saying Polanco's going to come back and be a better version of Polanco. We believe Garver and Haniger can be better. And then Solano, as kind of more of a contact-oriented player, fills the role that Turner had, or to a degree, if you want to say Rojas, Urias, others they let go, Haggerty. They've changed a few pieces, but this is not transformative change. If you were a Mariner fan in the early days of November saying this team needs fundamental change to be able to compete with the Astros in the American League West, if that was your belief, you obviously are very unfulfilled right now, which I think is a big reason why the DiPoto press conference stimulated such reaction over the last couple days.
Yeah, all kinds of reaction. None of it good.
I'm aware. I've been following. I can hear people from 3,000 miles away what the reaction has been. So I'm aware of what the reaction has been.
Yeah, listen, I like Jerry. He's a nice guy. I think he's a very smart guy, yet he's got a knack for finding that one line to throw out there that everybody latches onto, which you just shake your head at and go, what possessed you to say that? And in this case, it was, a feeling of being underappreciated. This offense is not being appreciated for what it does well, which leads to the automatic bounce back of, all right, well, what is it they do well? What did they do well? They were one of the worst offenses in baseball. And it feels like that they want to push the narrative to, well, look at what they did during this final month, this final 5 weeks or whatever it was. It's like, yeah, but the season's a lot longer than that. It's a lot longer than that. So we're just going to dismiss everything that took place before that and say, this is who they are moving forward. To me, it's like, well, this is what they can be capable of, but does that mean this is who they are? And hey, we're good. We don't need to make any moves. That's kind of how he portrayed it in the press conference. Like, we didn't really have many holes coming into this offseason. And I'm thinking, I beg to differ. I think you had more than a few holes to address there. But I don't know if that's spin or if he truly believes that this is a team that's offensively underappreciated and ready to really take that next step.
Well, upgrades are expensive, and I think that's where we should begin this portion of the dialogue. That if they had resources, if they had the ability to spend more than effectively $10 million on free agents, and again, their payroll's down from where it was 2 years ago, if they had the resources, Christian Walker would be the first baseman right now instead of Luke Raley. I've mentioned this statement in the past, and I'll repeat it here because I think it's appropriate. You can look at the field and say, Haniger, okay, we believe in him. He'll bounce back, we think. Raley, there's some upside there. He had a solid first year. Garver can't possibly be that bad back-to-back years. Julio's going to be better. JP's going to be better. He's not going to be injury-plagued and unproductive for a second straight year. All of these things individually they may well be true. But Dave Dombrowski told me years and years ago, I realize the game has changed a bit since the days that I was covering the Tigers, but this is applicable here. He said, John, if you're going to win the league, if you're going to make it to the World Series, you need to, at a majority of your positions on your everyday team, majority, so let's say 5 out of the 9, look at your field and say, I have one of the 3 best players in the American League at that spot for a majority of your position players. And the Mariners simply cannot say that. Now, are there ways that you can win and surprise? Yes. And actually, a successful way of doing that is with a pitching staff that is as good as the Mariners, which gave up the fewest runs in the American League last year. So that's a good starting point. And again, in fairness, if you flip one game, 1 out of 162, and more specifically, 1 game out of the 2 series they played against Detroit, Seattle's in the playoffs. So Jerry is correct in saying they weren't that far away. They weren't. You flip 1 game. Look at the standings. That's a matter. And granted, the Tigers clinched on a Friday. I get it. But if they won 1 game against the Tigers in those 2 series at the end of the season, it's a fully different conversation. So they do have some redeeming qualities. But to your point about the way that Jerry presented it, he just doesn't really have a good feel for perhaps the way that the fans have experienced this and how unfulfilled the average Seattle Mariner fan is at the moment. And that's, again, some of these points are fair to make in isolation, but the fullness of the experience, if you've been a season ticket holder or a devoted fan of this team for a long time, we've had 1 playoff season in 2 decades, and it looked like we were on the verge of something really special, and now we're in the process of wasting it. And that, as a sports fan, you know, I've been one. I know what that feels like. You almost would rather not have your hopes taken up to that peak, and then feel that unfulfilled. It's almost better to just to not be that hopeful, right? And to then all of a sudden feel that darn it, we're that good, we're that close, but why can't we get over the top? And that what I just articulated is the prevailing, at least my sense, and you would know better because you're in it every day, but that's my sense of how Mariner fans feel. And I feel as though the way that Jerry explained it, fully realizing he made some fair points there, did not speak to the emotions of the Mariner fan. And at the end of the day, we're not trying to argue in a boardroom. These are your customers and fans who deal in the realm of emotion. That's what we do in sports. And I think that he hasn't really figured out that piece of how to communicate with the heart as opposed to the numbers.
Yeah, I mean, it's very true, especially you bring up all those points, and maybe you can brief him. But I mean, to me, why
don't you give him a call, John?
I'll try. I'll work on it.
Well, I said lots of stupid things. Just ask my wife. Some of the things,
and I have too. Believe me, I have too.
in a marriage. But hey, what do you think about I feel like they don't get enough credit for their farm system. I just said what Jerry said basically, but no, really. I mean, they have done a really fantastic job, especially since Jerry has gotten here. I mean, they were bottom 5 as far as their farm system goes, and you know, who was it? The Athletic, I think, that has them at number 1 now. And just what do you credit that to? In, you know, how does a team, first of all, make that swing? And I'm not sure if you know some of the anecdotes or stories or whatever, but that part should make a lot of fans hopeful that since Dipoto has gotten here, the farm system, and at least their ranking, has been really good. And it's just a huge, massive turnaround.
It has been. And I think they've done a really good job both domestically through the draft and also on the international side. And let's remember this, too, that it's not only the players that you've got at the major league level now. Jerry likes to make trades. He's made a ton of trades. I think about the Castillo trade in particular, and they would not have gotten as far as they did in 22 had it not been for him, for Castillo, and the trade they made. And you think about that move, they gave up multiple high-level prospects to Cincinnati to make that possible, and you don't make a trade like that unless you have a strong farm system with then additional depth to leave to have left over and to continue to grow. So I think their player development group, Andy McKay, has done a really good job. I think developmental wise, and also just the draft itself, they've picked the right guys. When you pick especially on the pitching side of things, a lot of these guys are drafts. Kirby is a draft. Gilbert's a draft. Yeah. Woo's a draft, of course. Miller's a draft. So a lot of these guys are coming through the draft. That says that they do a really good job of identifying pitching. And believe me, a lot of people in this sport would love to be able to emulate the success they've had of both identifying and then nurturing them properly to where they have success. And for the most part, knock on wood, have stayed pretty healthy at the major league level. So that is the way they have built this team. And if you read through, just sort of looking through the tea leaves a little bit here of how they've handled this offseason, what do we know about Jerry? He loves to make trades. He loves to take a big swing at a high-level guy, not afraid to make big trades. And yet this winter, very quiet by his standards on the trade market. Yeah. And that to me says this, that he knows that he probably will not have the sheer spending capacity near term and potentially not for a while to upgrade the team in free agency with big dollars. And so he has basically the only avenue to do it is to be smart in the draft and smart in developing. And to almost do like what the Tigers have done, which you draft really well and then around the margins you'll sign a player here or there, but you're not going to take a big swing in free agency. So you just can't go for broke. If you were to put in Emerson in a trade, for example, right now, you're vulnerable because you need him. You either need him in a big way at the trade deadline when you know you're good enough, or he needs to play shortstop for you for a long time because you're not going to be able to replace J.P. Crawford with this year's equivalent of a Corey Seager or a Trey Turner. You're not going to be able to spend like that. That's what this offseason tells me, is that a GM who would love to make a trade on any day that ends with Y, all of a sudden didn't make any trades of consequence. You raise an eyebrow there and say, wait a minute. They had some clear issues to deal with. Offensively, they did really very little. That tells me that they're, if not a directive from ownership about not trading guys. I'm not saying that. I'm saying ownership has likely said, here is your number. And if you can't basically saying you can't go beyond this number, you're seeing it now. It's lower than it used to be. And so you have to just operate in a different way to protect yourself, because if you go for broke right now and it doesn't work out and all of a sudden you're not too far away from when Gilbert becomes a free agent, etc., then you're in trouble. And I think that the Mariners are trying to avoid that precipitous drop. They're going to still be a good team this year. They will. They'll be good, because you can't have pitching like this and fall off the map. It's just, that's not going to happen. At least I don't think it will. But will you be great? Will you be a great team? It looked like they were building a great team a few years ago. They are not a great team. They're a good team. They have a chance to be, in a year when things click, very good. But they're not a great team. And I don't, just look around. The Dodgers are a great team. The Astros for a long time have been great. The Yankees have potential to be a great team. They just went to the World Series. That's the realm of the great. The Mariners are not great. They're good to very good when everything clicks. And they're going to have to, as a result, be a lot more cautious than what Mariner fans would have liked to have seen. And again, Jerry could, if you look at the coaching that we're giving him about how to give the press conference, if you say what you said, you upset the fans a little bit. If you say what I just said and acknowledge that your payroll's down from where it used to be and ownership has given us these guidelines, which are not what the fans want to hear probably, then your owner's mad at you So who would you rather upset, the fans or your boss? I think
Not
that we.
the guy that writes my paycheck.
I think that we have a pretty good idea of the choice. And guess what? As much as the fans that are driving in Redmond and Bellevue right now don't like the answer, he probably made the right choice because that's the guy that signs the paychecks. And so I think he probably had to put things in those terms. Doesn't make it satisfying, but I think that was how the business typically runs.
It is, unfortunately, and we'll see what they can do as far as this start is crucial. I've been saying this, John, and I know we're up against the clock, but I've been saying this is the most consequential start to a season that they've had in recent memory, because I think this fan base is at a different level of kind of teetering, going, you know what, I'm done. If they don't get off to a good start, I think there are going to be a lot of nice seats available at these games.
Well, it's a fair point. I'll make this point quickly. And in the midst of all this, there's one name we haven't mentioned yet so far in this conversation. It's Dan Wilson. Here's your first spring training as a manager. Now, granted, Dan's got great perspective, the respect of the whole room. Everybody loves Dan Wilson. But it's not an easy first year to walk into to say, okay, where's my easy entry point?
Yeah.
Nope, sorry, there isn't one. And I think that's going to have to, and Seitzer and everybody that's on the staff, there's going to have to be a real focus on immediate results. To your point, Bob. So they're on my short list of teams that I think will be fascinating to follow early on here in 2025.
Absolutely, John. We appreciate you, man. You're the best. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we look forward to next week. All the best, my friends. Thanks for everything. We'll talk Kraken next time around, okay?
All right,
Thanks, there we go.
You got it. Thank you so much.
There he is.